Well, hello, everyone. If you are joining us for the third time or the second time, I'm Nicole Beatty. If this is your first time here, again, I'm Nicole. It doesn't change who I am. We're going to round out our three-part grant writing series with really diving into the strong components that make a successful project proposal or grant proposal. So I've broken this down into 4 parts, looking at the pitch, or really what makes a good storyboard, strong writing, the metrics, so things like inputs and outputs and outcomes. We're going to look over a typical a budget template that you can use for part of your grant preparation, as well as looking through a work plan. So a lot of grants, especially online grants, will ask for these, noting that they do take different forms, but I've just tried to consolidate typical work plans into a tool. And if I was working on an offline proposal, these are some of the essential planning tools that I would be using to support my proposal development and my writing. So let's jump in. I just want to start with a traditional land acknowledgement, recognizing the gorgeous small part of Canada that I live in. So as a settler in Northumberland County, Ontario, I respectfully acknowledge that I am located in the traditional and treaty territory of the Michi, Sagi, and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the William Treaties First Nations, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville Scugog Island, Rama, Beausoleil, and Georgina Island First Nations. I respectfully acknowledge that the Williams Treaties First Nations have been stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters, and that their health and integrity remain vigilant over generations to come. We are all treaty people. My little bio, if you are here for the first time, and you can check me out at capacityforcommunity.com.
Nicole, sorry to interrupt. I just don't think your screen is being shared currently.
Oh, well, I apologize. Thanks for catching that. Let's sort that out. Can you see that now, Erin? Just the slide?
Just the slide.
Wonderful. Sorry, folks. So all you missed was a pretty picture of me and the traditional land acknowledgements, so not missing much there. Okay, so let's continue. So our learning journey today focuses on generating a proposal template that perfects your pitch for your program priorities, and it's supporting impact metrics, budget, and work plan. My intention is that you will leave this session with a greater understanding on how to use language and details that speak to the giving objectives of the funder, how to produce a list of transferable impact metrics that are specific to your program proposal, and finally, to build a budget and work plan that funders can get excited about. So let's start with the pitch, or the overall project proposal. This is a word bubble, and for the life of me, I couldn't get the color scheme to match the rest of the presentation, so it's a little burst of bold colors there. But these are typically the values that I apply to my grant writing. We explored these in module 1, but these are here just as a quick reference. So, strong writing, a really compelling pitch is data-driven. You're using clear languages. It's informed by resources that your organization uses. It's evidence informed, you're showing your own best practice or a community model in which you are proposing a solution to address a community gap. The project proposal needs to demonstrate viability, your roadmap to change, a list of partnerships and collaborations, as we know that funders tend to lean towards not necessarily co-applications, but a strong proposal that demonstrates synergy and collaboration amongst your community. We're going to talk about some benefits for the funder, but more importantly, your organization and your beneficiaries. And we're going to look at some of that financial information for scalability purposes. And we're also going to round it out with that work plan, which is essentially a blueprint of your key milestones, timeline, critical path, whichever you'd like to call it, in which you're mapping out the implementation schedule of your proposed project. So here's just a top level of a few of my favorite things that I always look at to make sure that I'm putting into my project proposal. So for me, a strong grant proposal is informed by the following. I want my project to be professional. I also want it to be genuine and authentic and reflect my organization, but I need that acumen to be the best that I can put forward, knowing that it is a very competitive market out there with respect to grant makers. So by professional acumen, I mean that it really has a strong validation for why you are proposing this project. And how innovative is it? So what makes you unique and how are you standing out amongst the crowd? We also want to make sure that your grant proposal is not just about you talking to the donor. We want to make sure that your proposal shows that you have engaged your participants, your clients, your service users, essentially the benefactors of your good work. And this is where that equity and inclusion comes in. And we really want to have that opportunity for the voices of the people that you support, the people who are going to benefit from this transformational gift, and that their voices are being heard in the grant. Essentially, your role as a storyteller is to help tell the stories of the people you serve or the places you serve or the things that you address, because ultimately that grant maker is going to be giving in response to that target audience, or giving into support or to better or improve or enhance the lives or placemaking if you're talking about the environment or a physical space. So we want to make sure that your project clearly lays out goals and how that vision for impact is then implemented through strong inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And we're going to do a quick metrics 101 here in a few slides. When I'm mapping out my pitch or my draft for my project proposal, I also want to make sure that I'm communicating the tangible results that will be achieved as a result of the donor or the funder's philanthropy. So I've mapped out my goals and my objectives, which are the activities or how I'm going to fulfill my goals. We're going to talk about some of the metrics that we use to measure the results, because at the end, I'm going to have to report back to that funder as to how they helped me or my organization achieve change. So I need to be thematic and consistent and results driven in that grant, because ultimately that's what I'm going to be reporting back on. So almost think of it as a really strong grant is kind of chapter 1 of your engagement with the funder. Chapter 2 is the gift acceptance, the most exciting part. And then chapter 3 is the final report. And then chapter 4 would be stewardship. And then chapter 5 would be the renewal. I also want to make sure that I'm communicating to the funder what opportunities and benefits are available to them for recognition and future engagement. A consistent theme that I try to keep in my instruction is it really is about you and your community. The funders are the partners. You are the catalyst for change. The funders are a bit of a vehicle to help you bring that all to light. But that doesn't mean that the funders' goals or priorities shouldn't be reflected in what you're trying to propose. Because again, in just like in module 1 and 2, a core theme too is we want to find that synergy and that alignment. So at some point in your proposal, we do need to acknowledge how we would recognize donors. So just rounding out, what else makes a proposal pitch perfect? We're going to talk about language in a second, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is to stick to the subject matter. Space limitations and word count. If you're someone like me and gets very excited and loves to tell stories, sometimes sticking within a word count can be very challenging, but at the same time, it helps with time management and it challenges me to be creative, clear, and concise in what I'm presenting to the funder. As much as I want to tell my own narrative, another creative challenge in being a grant writer or a storyteller is taking my narrative and being able to connect with the application guide or the questions that the funder is leading with. As we talked about as part of prospect research, thoroughly study the application guide and ask yourself, can I honor these questions? Can I fulfill what they're asking? Do my values align with what the funder is asking? Because those things will help with that qualification that we talked about. And if you commit to pursuing the application, then keep in mind that there's going to be that a little bit of that dance in the language, because there's that balancing act of presenting what you want to say, but then also letting the funder know that you are understanding what they're asking for. And we want to talk about clear, or we want to use clear and concise language, avoid jargon. As I always tell people when I'm reviewing their work or writing for them or asking them to transcribe information to me, my grandmother should be able to read this. We can all get caught up in buzzwords and our own organizational language, but we really want to be as clear and concise as possible. We also want to respond with evidence, statistics, and survey responses, which we'll get into in a little bit more detail momentarily. We want to be familiar with the research dealing with our organization. So that goes back to an earlier comment about being evidence-driven, community-informed. Maybe you have a best practice, or the work that you're doing is based on an existing model, or maybe you are proposing a new model to address a community issue. Whatever you're putting forward, whatever your methodology is for implementing your program or delivering your program, make sure that you are showcasing support as to why this is the best approach to solve the problem. And again, we want to reflect the funder's language in our response. So almost think of us grant writers as we're bilingual. We have to honor our communication and our narrative and our story as the champions of our organization, but we also have to be able to speak the language of the donor, or the funder, in this case, the grant maker, which is a good segue into a word about language. So here's some really important things I want you to take note of when drafting your proposal for the responses to a grant application. First, speak the funder's language. Again, it's your program, but it's really impressive as a grant review team, or the GRT, when you as the organization can demonstrate that you've studied the funder, their grant criteria, and application guide. I'm not saying lose your voice. Just show that grant review team that you're well researched and that you can clearly draw a line of alignment between your program and their philanthropy. Second, answer the question. Sounds common sense and pretty straightforward, but if you're anything like me, it is absolutely sometimes the biggest challenge, especially when you have that 50-word or 250-word count, or that word limit. So how can we clearly answer the question and stay on point? The majority of grant applications will provide examples of how to respond. So, you're reading your application guide, they ask the question, and then they give those examples, whether it's this is the information we're looking for, or some bullet points of examples. They're actually teeing you up for success, and ideally, or I'd like to think, they're trying to make our lives a little bit easier. So take their lead and format your response using that example. If there is no example, make sure you respond using keywords from the question. Think of it as active listening, but in written form. And finally, the final comment I want to say about the use of language is get to the point. The average reader has an attention span of only 8 seconds. Try to avoid tangents, history lessons, and most of all, desperation. You do good work. You're changing the small part of the world around you. So be bold, empowered, and engaging with your writing. We're just going to shift gears here for a second, because what I wanted to do in this module is actually dive into some of the resources that are going to be distributed with the recording of this session. So I'm just going to switch screens to the proposal template builder. I can also take this moment to pause and take any questions, or if you need me to clarify or reinforce anything that I've said so far. If not, seeing none, I'm going to go into my Word document. And Erin, if I can just ask you to confirm that you can see the Word document.
Yep, good to go.
Wonderful, thank you. So folks, you're going to receive this as one of your tools, templates that you can use as part of your grant planning. It's going to look a little overwhelming, a little long. Like with all templates, take from it what you want, add to it what you want, don't use it at all. I'm a planner, especially when it comes to my proposal development. So you build off of this template builder, especially if I have to develop proposals that are offline or proposals for grant makers that don't have their own application process, or they've just said, you know, submit us a document. So over time, this is built out to kind of reflect common themes or requirements or criteria that grant makers ask. The great thing about a template builder is I also use it as an outline when I'm writing, so that when this is complete and I'm actually pursuing grants who have application forms or an online portal, I'm able to take my draft copy to help inform my writing. I don't encourage copy and pasting because, again, that would be straying from my principle of using language and reflecting what the donor is asking for or wants to see. But it's a really great head start. And so hopefully you can use some of your drafting to inform the application development. So a lot of this is straightforward. You'll have it to peruse. If afterwards you have any questions, I can clarify, but I am going to go over it really quickly. The introduction, straightforward. It's typically that short abstract or an executive summary of your proposal. I like to think of it, if the funder is only going to read one thing, so try and get that into that. Almost think of it as the micro component of your program proposal, project proposal. Your social good statement, or just a more compelling way to say your need statement. So this is really identifying that community or social issue that you're addressing. Maybe you have an impact statement that you open up with. So this is really that first impression, grabbing you at the heartstrings. I'm hooked, I'm going to read the rest of the proposal. Whether this comes later in your proposal or earlier on, your community snapshot. So this is really the profile or the demographic of the community you serve, high level. So that small part of the world in which you exist to serve and support. It's not the target audience or the beneficiaries, because that will come momentarily. The qualification and experience, or again, another fancy way of saying organizational history. Fine balance between demonstrating who you are, how long you've been serving, what your legal setup is, and the expertise that you bring to the table versus a history lesson in your organization. I have seen pages and pages of historical background that worked in the 90s doesn't necessarily work in 2022. So this is your opportunity to really showcase how long you've existed, who you are, and why you have a seat at the table. So we've introduced the social good or the issue that you're looking to influence and change. We've talked about where in the world you exist to serve, and we've given a little bit of expertise about who you are and why we should pay attention to you. Now we get into the crust of, or the climax of the program proposal, which is the program overview. So this is the introduction to either the solution or the community model that your project is going to implement. So this is what you've designed. This is kind of the bio. If I was reading a profile about your program, this is the, what it is, who you're serving, all rolled up into a nice opening sequence. Then you can transition into the goals and objectives. If you don't know what goals and objectives are, goals are typically the broad vision or those aspirational, what you'd like to achieve. And then the objectives are the list of actions. So what you're going to do to fulfill the goals. Sometimes this is a separate section, or you can roll that up nicely into your program overview. Again, expand as much as you want, shrink in as much as you want. The target audience. So this is who the program specifically, not necessarily organization, but the beneficiaries or the demographics specifically linked to your program proposal. And we really want to try and create that human image of who the funder is possibly going to be connecting with and supporting. So population specifics, age, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, culture and heritage specifics, socioeconomic specifics, while obviously being sensitive and not exploiting who you're supporting. Really, going into 2022, as a lot of you will know, especially in the work that you do through your network, we're really trying to be equity, diversity, and inclusion driven. So this is an opportunity to apply your EDI framework or your EDI policy or that equitable lens in who you serve into the target audience. This is really important, the program methodology. So this is the proposed action plan, service delivery model, your activity map, or your strategy for the program design and management. So you have now introduced the program and you are saying to the funder, we are implementing this program because it's going to change the world. Well, how did you get to this point? What informed, why this approach and not another attempt? So this is where some more rationale can come into play, or you might apply your writing through a process lens. So maybe your program evolves over stages, or it's rolled out in different times of the year. So really your approach or your methodology, breaking down the how. So we've talked about the why. Think of the program methodology as the how. Program outcomes, we're going to spend some dedicated time talking about metrics. I know we can get really confused. I still get confused about outputs and outcomes. Donors might use metrics. They might use a different language than you're used to. My number one rule of thumb to you is however the funder is defining outcomes or metrics or measurements in their application guide or on their website or in their profile, adapt to that. That's the moment when we want to use the funder's language. Program resources, this is anything and everything from the human and the financial and the capital resources needed to fulfill your program. So this is where you're going to talk about the staff, the talent, the time, who's going to run the program. Are you going to be using volunteers? If so, how many? For what for? Are there facilities, equipment, other capital or technology involved? What materials and administration support do you need for the program? Program collaboration, or another way to say partners. So this is an opportunity to demonstrate your partnership matrix. Maybe you're listing the roles and responsibilities of your partners, whether they are your co-applicant, your collaborator. Maybe you're partnering with someone to do the transportation component of a project. Maybe you are partnering with an organization because they're going to host you in their space. So whether it's active program delivery or in-kind support, maybe you have a program partner that's going to do your evaluation for you, or they're going to do client referrals. Essentially any partner that's going to intersect with the program, and just list them and give a short definition as to the role they're going to play in the program delivery. The implementation strategy is your work plan, which we're going to get to momentarily, as well as the budget. So I won't go on too long about that at this stage. The sustainability plan, we talked about it in module 1 or 2, but this is really answering that question of how are you going to keep delivering the program after the period of this grant? So this is the opportunity to demonstrate revenue diversification. If your project or program is time bound, meaning it's only going to run the life cycle of the grant, that's okay, and mention that in the program or in the grant application. It is okay to say the success of this program depends on evaluation and renewal of your support. But if you have an opportunity to show how this program, especially if it's the launch or the expansion of a program, is going to be absorbed into your organizational operations moving forward, this would be the part of the proposal or the application question in which you would address that. Most funders are going to ask you for your program evaluation. So this is the data you're going to collect and the methodology in which you are going to measure and track and monitor those outcomes, and then how you're going to use that information to report back to the funder. And we'll talk about that again here momentarily. Recognition opportunities, very straightforward. Maybe you've established a recognition matrix specifically for this program, or perhaps you are going to follow your annual recognition strategy that you use regardless of program or donor. Or if this is related to a specific campaign, maybe you have a naming recognition plan or virtual recognition plan that you're going to offer to the grant maker. If you don't have a formal plan, I always just insert that good old fashioned, we have many opportunities and we'd be happy to work with the grant maker to fulfill your philanthropic goals. Or if the funder has specifically said this is how they recognize, reflect that in your response. And if you can't accommodate the recognition opportunities, it is okay to note that with that follow-up sentence of something to the effect of, we'd be happy to work within you within our own capabilities. And then the impact summary is really just that, the conclusion. You're bringing it all home. Maybe it's just a way of your reiterating your opening impact statement, but think of it as that really heart-wrenching, grab you by the strings opening, and that really thoughtful, I'm going to remember this person forever closing. So 8 seconds. They're going to read something for 4 seconds at the beginning and 4 seconds at the end. So we want to balance out that captivating reading at both the beginning and the end. And then you're going to either create appendices or include attachments. And this is either opportunity for you to elaborate on some of your answers to the application. Maybe you have some additional information that doesn't fit into your proposal. It might make it too clunky, put it to the back. Or it's going to be the information that the funder's asking you for. So that can be anywhere from charitable, nonprofit, and corporation proof to your annual report, to audited financial statements, a detailed budget planning. They might ask for a case study, whatever really is the requirements of the funder. So I'm going to stop there for a moment. You're very welcome for the informative and excellent presentation. I really appreciate those comments. So we're going to go back into the presentation. Erin, I'm just going to ask you again if you can see only the screen now.
Yep, you're good.
Thank you. So that's the proposal template builder. I know it's about 7 or 8 pages in length in the Word document, and you're going to get it as is. It's editable. I've included some of those core descriptions to try to be writing prompts. It might sound a lot of, well, why do I want to fill out an outline when I can just get to writing? Trust me, especially if you have 1 or 2 program priorities that you're fundraising for vis-a-vis grants, having this outline is really going to be helpful, whether you are transitioning into an offline proposal or you need to pull parts out to inform the application. It can also be a really great brainstorming activity if you're approaching your writing as a team. Or if you're needing to get pre-approval from your ED or your director or your board, it's a really great way to say, hey, this is what I'm proposing, and then you can build off of that. So let's talk about metrics, everyone's favorite component of grant writing, I'm sure. So what are metrics? To me, they are measurable and they focus on your proposed project outcomes and the short to long-term change and success. Here we have 5, again, most grant makers will really be looking at outputs and outcomes, but I've tried to include all 5 areas of grant making metrics, just so that you have this knowledge in your archives. So these words do sound like synonyms. It's one word I can't say, but it is important for grant writers for you to understand their differences. Confusing these will weaken your grant proposals, but understanding them will also strengthen them. So let's talk about, and I am just looking at my other screen for a moment because I can't see the tiny writing on my laptop. So if I'm looking away, I apologize for a few moments. So inputs, what are they? They are the resources that contribute to your program delivery. So we talked about that in the template builder. The people, the things, the materials, the equipment that you need as your project is rolled out or your program is rolled out. And I apologize, but I recognize I'm using project and program interchangeably. Examples of inputs are those financial requirements, the dedicated staffing, maybe you have to have a volunteer recruitment plan, transportation. Do you need to get clients or the humans that you serve from point A to point B? Are you doing meal delivery or offering a shuttle to workshops? Do you need a venue that's outside of your own footprint, whether that's physical or do you need a virtual space? So software to host your programming. Will there be consultants involved, whether that's for program design, program implementation, or evaluation? The outputs are the results of your program activities, and we typically count these in a numerical sense using numbers or percentage. So examples of these, if you're running a food program, they can be the number of meals served that you are forecasting to serve. They're the number of people that you support, whether indirectly or directly. They could be the number of workshops or training sessions that you're going to provide. They could be the number of jobs created if you are employment-based or doing a social enterprise, or you're training people to then, to be job ready. It can even be the number of counseling hours that you anticipate delivering as a result of the program implementation. So if the outputs are the results, these are kind of the predicted, or these are our forecasting targets, then the outcomes is that fundamental change, the behavioral change, the human change that we see as a result of those outputs or the activities related to your program. And they're also they're more the qualitative aspects of measuring the results of your outputs. So if you can think of outputs as the quantitative aspect and the outcomes as that qualitative part. And so examples can be, we are going to deliver 1,000 meals in the summer through a student lunch program. I'm thinking this up as I go. And the ideal outcome is, because we want to decrease hunger amongst children under the age of 12 in our neighborhood. It could be as aspirational as improved mental health, or even maybe you're looking to increase access to services or reduce transportation barriers to accessing support. So the indicators, I'd have to admit, of all 5 of these, this I always find the most complex, or where do they really fit in? But it's also the most complex, but good news, it's probably the least frequent one that you're going to use in your storytelling or your grant writing. So the best way that I can describe an indicator is they're the attributes or I was about to say indicators, but I'm trying to describe an indicator. So they're the attributes or those qualifications or the things that are going to support or determine your program's success, or they are the conditions or the environment in which your program is going to succeed. So for example, COVID is an indicator of whether my program is going to run or not. If a lockdown happens, well, my 1,000 meals aren't going to be served, or I'm going to find a different way, or maybe is going to be less. And fun fact, I'm actually not going to be decreasing hunger. I'm going to have to find ways to either endure the program or find another food security support mechanism to folks. So examples of indicators can be that timeline. Maybe you expect the program to be 9 months, but something happens, you have a staff change, or you have to move, and so 9 months become 12 months or become 18 months. How is that financially going to impact your ability to extend the program? Do you have to go out and ask the grant maker to extend their support, or find supplementary funding? I mentioned staff, but the attitude of staff could be: do you have low morale, staff burnout, staff retention? Maybe you got a budget cut during the halfway through the program delivery. How are we going to pivot and plan for that? The funders' flexibility. So you would have all seen that as an indication of your success in 2020, when you started the new year, you were really excited about what you're going to be rolling out. The world shut down because of a global pandemic, and we were all racing to connect with our funders to see, like, hey, we asked for A, B, and C, but we need to now spend it on X, Y, Z. And then I mentioned environmental, or it could even be economic factors, or it could be political factors. Were you running a program last August and September, and surprise, federal election that none of us were, well, we knew, but maybe we were hoping weren't going to happen? Did that create a ripple in your programming? Did you have to adapt? So the indicators are not necessarily always on your metrics map. It can also be asked differently by a funder vis-a-vis the question of: how will you plan for risk or risk mitigation, or what's your plan for a change in scenario? So really think of indicators as scenario planning. And typically, funders will ask you either: are you risk averse, or what's your risk mitigation plan or your risk policy, and or what's your contingency plan should you need to adapt? And then the impact. This is typically post-grant or post-program. So the outputs and the outcomes and the indicators, all the people and tools to do the program, and how you've achieved your success. You've evaluated your program, but the impact are the results directly linked to your program outcomes. So first comes outputs, then comes outcomes, then you do your great work in the world. It's time to wrap up, and you are starting to prepare to report back to the funder. So this is really post-evaluation storytelling. How are you going to demonstrate success to the grant maker? You can also consider it as part of your ongoing stewardship with the donor. Post-grant reporting, a lot of us will call this impact reporting nowadays. It's really another way to say a donor report or a final grant report. That report back. Examples that you can use in impact storytelling are infographics that are supported by testimonials, survey graphs with commentary. So maybe your food program, if I keep using that example, you surveyed all the participants, but any quantitative data you're collecting, always have opportunity for that comment field. As you can see with the impact examples I'm giving you, I'm trying to balance that quantitative with the qualitative, the outputs with the outcomes. Maybe you're going to use a case study that explains how a participant got a job, or how they became food secure, or how their mental health was improved. So if you are claiming an outcome will be increased self-esteem amongst youth, or better mental health amongst seniors with disabilities, you're going to need to use storytelling in your impact reporting with funders. So ultimately, we're really trying to look at that narrative that's going to exemplify the program experience. The stronger the impact, the better grant retention can be. So how do we lay this all out? I use a logic model because they're pretty basic. They're not as complicated as a theory of change or other metric frameworks, but again, to each their own. This was a logic model that I found from a resource I usually refer back to called Submittable. For those of you that don't know, a logic model can take many forms, but for the purpose of this presentation, the definition of a logic model is to really help lay out those metrics. So I sometimes start with this before I go to my program template builder, because my logic model is really going to help me make sense of everything. And the great thing about logic models is they are point form, and then you can take those point form high level thoughts and translate them into really compelling language for your project proposal. So this is just a really great example of input. So again, those resources that you're going to need, the funding, staff, and volunteers. This one actually includes high-level activities or deliverables or the actions that are going to be taken. Their outputs, so they're going to count or measure based on the number of meals, the number of people fed, the number of families they're going to be supporting. This seems to be a higher regional or multi-region communities. So for example, I know I'm involved in food security work here we're in a regional government, but I would say that we are supporting 7 member municipalities. So one big region, but we're really getting in deep into 7 specific and 7 quite diverse neighborhoods. And then individuals. So they've really focused on the delivery of meals, but they're also looking at product or the components of the program. But as you can see, the majority of the measurements are based on the humans that they're supporting. And then they've actually decided for this program example, they've broken it up over short-term and long-term outcomes. So that's the change in the world that we're going to see as a result of the program. So a food security program, for example, their goals their measurable outcomes would be to reduce hunger, see less people food secure, reduce the stress of families, and wanting to see a sustained reduction of poverty. So you achieve this change, but they want to sustain that change moving forward. I've included, well, this I believe is a really great example. Everyone has their own tool. So I've included, Erin will be sharing with you a logic model that you can edit. You can delete my logo and you can put in your logo. And this is really where you can start. So inputs, as we explained, deliverables you can use as activities. I typically plan based on deliverables because sometimes the program in of itself is the core activity. So the deliverables will be kind of the what I'm delivering on through the program implementation. I include my performance indicators because I want to see my contingency plan and potential risks in the same map as my metrics, outputs and outcomes, so the qualitative and quantitative measurables. I'm also going to include actual results or my post-grant analysis, partially because I will use this logic model in my evaluation, but I also want to just have everything organized into one nice simple table. And those actual results will be, so if I say my output, I'm going to deliver 1,000 meals, but I end up delivering only 500 meals. That's my actual result, but I'm also going to need to have a rationale or an explanation as to why I only performed at 50% capacity. Or the other way around, instead of 1,000, I was able to do 2,000 meals. And my rationale for that would be my grocery store came in as an in-kind donor, but that wasn't part of my program proposal originally. And then the impact, I'm going to make note of the stories and the commentary or the case studies that I'm going to use in my impact reporting. Moving along, So that will be included with what Erin sends out. So we want to talk very briefly about how you can demonstrate community changing impact. So how we've talked about some tools as to how you lay this all out, but what are you actually looking for, or some of the data or the information you want to gather as you go into your proposal planning? So we're going to just talk very briefly about how to gather information, program evaluation, and reporting back. And if you can think about these three things while you're developing your project proposal, I can guarantee you it's going to make your evaluation and your post-grant reporting so much easier. If you're planning and preparing your program proposal, do all the housekeeping that you can at the beginning. Grant writing is definitely a front-loaded process. But actually, Erin and I were talking about this just before we opened up the room. Sometimes you're thinking and doing, and it feels like you're never moving anything along. And then all of a sudden, you have your full package and everything is ready to go. And it's because you've done so much intentional work that back end or that end loading work, I'm not saying it's easy, but hopefully it'll be a little bit lighter. So gathering information. How are you going to collect the data? And this can take an array of methods. I'm sure that you have your own way of collecting your information. Tried, tested, true models are or methods are intake forms. If you do that with your organization, classic participant surveys, attendance. So do you monitor attendance indirectly, directly, individuals? Are you also going to measure the engagement or the support of families? Do you do group dynamics? If so, you're going to want to report separately on individuals and groups versus communities. Frequencies and occurrences. So how many times do you run the workshop? How many times a week do you deliver the food? How many times are you going to connect people with employment? How many educational seminars are you going to deliver? Benchmarking. The really great thing about this network is you guys are a network. Do you share resources? Do you have frameworks that you guys can exchange to help with some of that, showing best practice to evidence-driven program methodology? Have community conversations. Obviously I always ask people, consent to, we are having this conversation, but I'm never going to disclose who you are or name you in my storytelling. But I just want to let you know that our conversation is going to inspire my writing, and you might see that reflected in some of the proposal or the reporting at some point. So community conversations are a really great way to collect some of that qualitative information. And then other qualitative data can be interviews. It can ask participants to submit feedback forms. It can be that comment field on your participant survey. Program evaluation, that can be of in itself its own seminar. But grants are always going to want to know, how are you assessing the performance of your program, and how are you going to demonstrate to us that you fulfilled your outputs and your outcomes. So again, at the beginning, when you're designing your program, if you can design your evaluation process, they can speak hand in hand, especially because then you know what kind of information you're going to need to gather and collect throughout the program. So set your criteria as soon as possible. Decide how you're going to collect those methods. So again, are they surveys? Is it online? Is it going to be paper? Is it anonymous? How are you going to consolidate all of this? Are there tools for doing your evaluation? So whether are you going to hire a third-party evaluator? Grant makers might not be very generous or understanding around administration dollars, but they are very generous and understanding around evaluation. Do you need to purchase a software SurveyMonkey, LinkedIn tools, really any other cloud-based technology that you might need to use for the purpose of the program. And again, be prepared to describe your methodology in the application or in your offline proposal. Your funder is always going to ask you, how are you going to measure success? But then how are you going to monitor and track that success? That's essentially program evaluation. And then with respect to reporting your impact, so this is that post-program storytelling I mentioned earlier. And I'm just going to leave you with this. Again, we could have impact reporting as its own dedicated module. But if I can leave you with some really good food for thought quickly on impact reporting, always follow the funder's report template. Typically, they'll have a scoring metrics, or if they're a really great grant maker, they will provide the post-grant report in the application guide. But essentially, if you've done an online application, your funder report is going to really consist of a summary of your outputs and outcomes, your budget, and your work plan, which is why if you go back to your logic model, and if you can record those actual results and those indicators and the impact, that might not be what you submit to the funder, but that's what you can use to inform the writing of your report. I don't need to go on about how important data, testimonials, and stories are. You want to be able to show what those baseline outcomes are to growth. I'm going to show you that in the work plan here. Be honest. Were there challenges? Did you have to make changes to the program, but you still were successful? Were there staff changes? Did you have to redeploy because of COVID and absenteeism due to illness? Include budget actuals, even if the funder doesn't ask for it. The more financial transparent and a strong financial steward you can be, funders really remember that. So really work with your accounting team or your finance team to have really strong tracking with the grant dollars. And then answer that sustainability question in your funder's post-grant report. You talked about sustainability. You've just gone out and changed the world. And so this is how you're planning, in 2023, how you're going to do phase 2 of the program. We're going to get into budget. I'm just going to go through the budget and work plan sheets, and then we'll have a good 5 minutes or so for questions or going back for clarification. So your budget is your cash flow, good old fashioned revenue versus expenses. But ultimately, grant makers, funders are really going to be looking this with quite high scrutiny because they ultimately want to know what their return on for investment is. Really crunched right down, essentially what is the cost per person for the program delivery. So your proposal describes your project or your program in words, and obviously your budget does this in numbers. And we want to make sure that your budget aligns with the type of proposal you are developing, which is why it's so important in your resource sections. If you can give high level costs, when you get to the budget, that's when you're actually going to do the math and demonstrate the calculations, as well as give the rationale for what the costs are. So the budget template, I am just going to go over to the budget. This is going to be included in your toolbox that Erin's sending out. Erin, just want to make sure you can see Excel.
Yep, you're good.
Thank you very much. So again, you all have probably filled out a grant budget before. They are a million dimes a dozen. This is a pretty straightforward Excel spreadsheet. The columns are already, the formulas are already set in there for you. But again, just like with the work plan, I tried to go in and include all of the information that the toughest of grant makers would expect from you. Take from this what you want. So obviously the projected revenue, this is specifically, it's not necessarily your organizational budget. but this is the revenue or the donations specifically to the program or whatever it is you're proposing to the grant maker. So it's a budget relative to the ask, not the organization as a whole. So you're going to list any individual donations, whether it's cash, demonstrating the value of in kind, that classic, are they confirmed or pending? And then this is the calculations. The calculations are in the expense sections, but for the calculations, maybe I've put in $10,000 and I want to show that this is 2 individual donors at 5,000. And I might just say major donors to the org. I typically don't identify individual donors in project proposals. Corporations are different because they're obviously a lot more public. So again, your corporate donations, so this can be just corporate gifts or corporate foundations, would follow the same sequence. I'm going to insert a new row for every corporate donor I have on my radar. I'm going to identify sponsorship separately. I'm going to indicate if I'm going after other grants. I'm also going to include the grant that I'm asking for in the project proposal. I'm going to list government grants separately, just because I think it's important to show the ratio of government funds to private and public philanthropy. If there's any special fundraising or community event fundraising involved, you can include it here. And then an area for earned income. So this is really for all non-charitable revenue. Maybe you are collecting membership fees, or maybe you are creating or you're charging a small nominal fee for program admission, or you are an employment-based organization that also runs a social enterprise. And so you are generating proceeds from the sale of coffee or other services, or a thrift store, and those proceeds are going to be counted towards the program. You would include that there. And then other is really an opportunity for you to include any other revenue sources that are not identified. Program expenses, again, direct costs associated with implementation, design, delivery, and evaluation and reporting of the program. Fully inclusive. Staff wages and benefits. This is where the calculations come into fold. Say I'm hiring my staff manager at $50,000. That includes mercs, their benefits. So I'm saying it's a 1 full-time employee to manage, I apologize if I'm not spelling correctly, and evaluate the program for, 50 weeks. And then in the calculations, I'm going to do, the calculations are going to match up, but say the base salary is $45,000 and my mercs are 20%. So, well, it'll actually then be 49,000. But what I would include here is I would show, 49,000. So I would put 49K salary times 20% mercs. So whatever my description or rationale is would show up in the calculations tab. And then again, this is just a laundry list of potential program costs or general operations. You have an opportunity, if you're running a food program, you're going to include the cost for meals and takeaway packages, mileage, volunteer honorariums. You're going to know what costs are associated with your program implementation. And then ultimately, your project revenue is going to subtract from your expenses. And yes, we do want to have a balanced budget for the purpose of submitting to a grant. If you have surplus, and those are reserves for something else, make sure you demonstrate, give a statement here from your treasurer or something that is explaining why you are showing a surplus. We're just going to close out here with the work plan. So if you can bear with me. Are we? No. Sorry, folks, we are just going back to this. Can you see the budget template screen, Erin?
Yep, I can.
Great, thank you. And we're just going to close out with the work plan. This is your roadmap to implementing change. So whether you call it a critical path, a schedule, a timeline, this is really where you are demonstrating your processes that are associated with dates or deadlines, and you're demonstrating when certain actions or activities will be activated or implemented. And so you are getting this work plan template in your package. Again, take from it, add from it what you want. Don't use it at all, but at least it gives you a sense of, and again, this is designed based on a really high level, very sophisticated, highly sophisticated funder. So I'm going to include my goal. I'm going to take this directly from my program template builder. I'm going to list all the activities that are related to implementing the goal or to fulfilling the goal. I'm going to talk about any specific deliverables, such as actions. Sometimes activities and deliverables are the same thing, depending on how complex your program is. If you're like, Nicole, an activity and a deliverable, they're the same, just pick your column and delete the other. The who is the role, the responsibility. So is that you? Is that the staff coordinator? Is it the ED? Is it a volunteer? Is it a partner or one of your collaborators? Make sure you identify them there. The timing is the deadline. So either April 1st, or maybe it's a period of time. So February to May is workshop delivery. So that would be either your hard deadline or your time range. So the baseline and the targets. Some work plans will ask you, where are you now? And then what change are you going to see? Or that scalability, what growth or reduction are you going to see throughout the lifespan of the program? So your baseline could be, if I'm using the meal program as an example, right now I'm feeding 500 people. My output in my program builder was 1,000 plus 500. So my target is post-grant, I will now be feeding, or I will have fed 1,500 people. So I went from 500 up to 1,500 because as a result of the grant, I'm going to be able to feed an additional 1,000 people. The measurement, so this is either going to be my output or my outcome, depending on what I'm putting in as the activity or the baseline starting and then where I'm coming from. The target can also be qualitative, so that increase in mental health, that reduction in hunger. But really that measurement, I'm going to pull that output or outcome from my grant proposal, because this is where funders get you. They're looking at, okay, they've listed their goals, they've talked about their outcomes and outputs, but now are they applying them to their work plan? So it is important to replicate whatever you've put in the written body of the proposal or the grant application. Make sure that that carries over into your work plan. Some might ask you for associated costs. I always include them because chances are I'm not always flipping back to my budget. So it's really good to know for me how I can consolidate this as well into my work plan. That does bring us to the end of our session. Like I said, I feel like I could spend 60 minutes on each component. I want to be specific and detailed. I want you to take away something. My gift to you is really to give you tools that can amplify your current practice. So the resources that are going to be included in this video recording it's going to be that template builder. You're going to have that sample logic model for planning out your mapping out your metrics. You're going to have that budget template, and then you're going to have that work plan template. They're all edible. You don't eat them. They are you can edit them in Word and Excel. I hope you can make it your own. I hope you can add. I hope you can take. Or if you already have your own fantastic tools, maybe you can just do a quick reference to see maybe what you're missing. I know it looks like a lot of work when grant writing is already exhausting, but if I can leave you with one thing, if you can schedule time to prepare and plan and outline your project proposal, I can guarantee you your year's worth of grant writing is going to be a lot more efficient and consistent. I've really enjoyed hanging out with you virtually these last few weeks. So honored that Erin found me and gave me this opportunity to speak with you all and hopefully informed and inspired some of you. She will be sending out evaluation for these 3 modules. Please be raw honest. It helps Erin figure out how to plan moving forward, and you're going to help me continue on my own journey as a facilitator and presenter. If you're still with me, I'd be happy to take any questions, or if we need to go back to anything, we can do so now. Alternatively, you can also email me at impact@capacityforcommunity.com if we need to take this offline.
There is a question that just came through in the chat there, Nicole. I don't know if you caught it.
Wonderful, from Emily?
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Emily. I don't know if you want to ask yourself, or I'm happy to, I can just read it and reply. So you mentioned not sounding desperate. Can you elaborate on that? Also related, do you think funders are tired of hearing about COVID-19 has impacted organizational demand and needs? Both really great questions. So desperate for me means you'll hear me say using emotional and compelling and inspiring language. To me, desperate is how do you choose to see the cup? Is it half empty or is it half full? I try to avoid using the words like things like need, and more about opportunity for change, impact moving forward. It's not a need statement, it's my social good statement. I try to avoid negative language and things that this isn't happening because, and this is going to happen moving forward. So it's really, I guess what I'm just trying to say is being positive and confident, but without letting the funder know that you don't need their support. So I think that's where, when you can be as evidence-based as possible, or citing best practice and community modeling, and about how this program is going to take you from where you are now to where you want to be, and inviting the funder to come along with you to achieve that change. That's just what I'm suggesting. I think over the last 10 years, we've really moved from need and issue and look, the world has so many problems, and let's be honest, the world has many problems, but to being just a little bit more realistic and, hey, we're solutions driven, we're community focused, and we just want to reflect that in the language. With respect to COVID-19, I think we talked about this in module 1, where COVID-19, for me, and the way that I'm approaching my writing, and to each their own, for me, it's no longer the leading in. We're living in a pandemic, we've pivoted, we're constantly readapting. I think you need to articulate how COVID-19 has impacted you and where you're at now, but how you're continuing to move on. So I think it's more about where you're at now and where you're going. A lot of organizations, and actually you've made me think to include that in the proposal template builder, is a lot of organizations in their program explanation will just have a very small statement on COVID-19 impact. Over the last few years, we've adapted in this way. This is where we're at now. And this grant is to help us to continue to leverage or excel at where we're at. So I think COVID-19 has to be acknowledged, but in my personal opinion, it's no longer the case for support unless you are specifically applying to a COVID-19 emergency or social service relief grant. So unless COVID-19 is the core component of the grant, to me, it's just it's an acknowledgement in the case for support, but it's not the case for support anymore. Thanks, folks. So Emily, if I didn't answer your question, happy to, my phone number is on the end slide there. I'm available for the next 90 minutes. I'm actually writing a grant myself. So feel free to give me a call and we can have a more one-to-one talk. Jenny, could you talk a bit more about measurement column in the work plan? What information do we pull from the logic model? Excellent. So in the work plan, we're showing what our baseline is and where our target is. So if I use that example of my baseline is 500 people, my target is going to be 1,500 people fed. The measurement I'm putting out in there would be my output. So back in my program proposal, I've written in outputs, I'm going to measure the number of meals that I delivered. So you're going to see 500 people as baseline, 1,500 people under target, and then my measurement is going to be the number of meals served. If I'm doing something that is outcome, so my baseline would be seniors and poor mental health. My target would be I don't know, 100 seniors are going to receive mental health training. My measurement would be the outcome of increased mental health. So the measurement column is really what you're taking from your output, and it's either going to be your output or your outcome column from the logic model, if that makes sense. You're welcome, Emily. Cameron, do you believe less is more? I have found in my grant writing that most funders look for that opposed to in-depth writing. Absolutely. In addition to concise and clarity, I think the brevity in my writing is really important. This is why I love when a funder gives me their application and it's like, you tell your life story in 500 words versus, okay, I have to put together a custom proposal. And I believe I mentioned that in the program template builder, I put in the copy section, challenge yourself to stay within a 250 or 500 word limit. If the funder's not going to tell you what their word count is, set your own word count. But absolutely, less is definitely more. And that's where that really clean, my grandmother could understand it over a cup of tea language really comes into play. So I hope that answered your question, Cameron. Thank you, Nicole, for your wonderful explanations, presentation explanations. Wonderful. So Jenny, so the measurement would be the difference variance between pre-grant and post-grant. That would be your result. The measurement is the output. I'm just trying to go back to my slide here. So if I'm in my work plan, and so the baseline is the number I'm starting at pre-grant, and my target is where I hope to be, I anticipate to be at the end of the program. My measurement, I'm not rewriting a new measurement. I'm going to take my measurement from my logic model. So it's either going to be my output or it's going to be my outcome. And that example I provided was, so say number of meals served. So if I'm saying, if I'm using a baseline of 500 people that I'm feeding now, because of the grant and the program, I want to feed 1,000 people more. My measurement in that column of the work plan, Jenny, would be the number of meals served. So I'm really just copying and pasting from my logic model into the work plan.
Thank you, Nicole.
You're welcome. Again, that's how I do it, but I recognize that people communicate differently. But thank you for challenging me to be a little bit clearer on that. I know there seems to be a lot of tools and moving parts, but ideally, once you have that logic model and the proposal builder done, you're able just to pull right from that and input your work plan. And I think really what I can leave you with, Jenny, is I think I made the comment earlier. When it comes to the work plan, the grant maker, a grant review team, because I've been on those review teams, they're actually looking to see, okay, everything they've said in the written body, they know how they're mapping that out. So they're looking for that consistency in planning and methodology, which is why there's a transferring of that outcome and output over into that measurable column. Well, I recognize we're going late into your afternoon. These questions are really good. They always make me reflect on my teachings, and obviously the important thing is to make sure that you are all very clear on what I'm leaving you with. Honestly, even though this is our last session together, I'm only an email or a text away. My responsibility is to make sure that you were able to digest everything that we talked about. If there's nothing else, Erin, it's been a lot of fun. And I think you guys are all doing really special work. I think it's pretty impressive with your national network. So thank you for choosing me. And thank you for all of you for choosing to spend 3 hours of your time with us over the last few weeks. So good luck. It's February, lots of time to raise some good grant money. And if you need any follow-up one-to-one support, please do reach out.
Thanks, Nicole. Thank you everyone for joining us today.
Take good care. Bye-bye.